The emergency room at Ridgeview General Hospital pulsed with activity. The steady beeping of monitors mixed with hurried footsteps, distant voices, and the occasional crackle of an intercom. Under the bright fluorescent lights, nurses moved swiftly between patients, tending to the endless cycle of emergencies. Ava Reynolds, a seasoned ER nurse, was scanning through patient charts at the front desk when the automatic doors slid open with a hiss. Ava glanced up instinctively, expecting to see another late-night case, a minor injury, a flu patient, maybe even a sprained ankle. Instead, her heart dropped. A little girl, no older than 7, stumbled inside, barefoot and trembling. Her long, dark hair was tangled, her pajamas torn and dirty, as if she had run through the woods. A faded stuffed bear hung limply from one hand, while the other clutched her side as if in pain. Her big brown eyes shimmered with fear, her small chest heaving with panicked breaths. Ava immediately dropped the clipboard and rushed toward her. "Sweetheart," she said gently, crouching to the child's level. "Are you hurt?" The girl's lower lip trembled. Her voice came out in a barely audible whisper. "They came." The room fell into silence. Ava felt a sharp chill race down her spine. "Who came, honey?" The girl gripped her bear tighter, her fingers digging into the fabric. She gasped for air, then sobbed out a desperate plea. "My grandma." "She won't wake up." Ava didn't hesitate. "We need a wheelchair over here now," she called over her shoulder. A second nurse rushed forward, but Ava kept her focus on the child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl sniffled, voice barely above a whisper. "Lena." Ava nodded, keeping her voice soft and steady. "Lena, I promise you're safe now. We're gonna help your grandma, okay?" Lena wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her pajama top, but it only smeared the dirt on her face. "Hi," she hiccuped between words. "I tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't move. There were loud noises. I got scared and hid." Ava's pulse quickened. "Loud noises?" Lena nodded quickly, gripping her bear. "People yelling and glass breaking." Ava's stomach tightened. She pressed the emergency intercom clipped to her uniform. "We need paramedics dispatched immediately to this address." She rattled off the location that Lena had sobbed out between gasps. "Possible assault. One unconscious adult." Lena flinched at the word assault. Ava turned back to her, softening her tone. "Sweetheart, the ambulance is on the way. They'll bring your grandma here, and the doctors will take care of her." Lena's eyes darted around the ER, searching for reassurance. Ava gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're very brave for coming here," she said. Lena sniffled, her tiny body trembling. "Is she gonna be okay?" Ava hesitated. She had seen too many bad cases to make promises, but she couldn't let Lena lose hope. "The doctors will do everything they can," she said. She crouched beside Lena again. "Did you see the people who were yelling?" Lena froze, hugging the bear even tighter. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "No, Grandma told me to hide under the table." Ava's throat tightened. This little girl had been alone, hiding in the dark, while something terrible unfolded around her. The radio on Ava's hip crackled, making Lena jump. "Paramedics on scene. One unconscious female, approximately mid-60s. Significant bruising, possible head trauma, signs of struggle, overturned furniture, broken glass, transporting now." Ava's breath caught. She turned back to Lena, pushing away the growing dread in her chest. "They're bringing her here now, sweetheart," she reassured her. Lena nodded, but tears spilled down her cheeks. "I tried," she whispered. "I tried and tried." Ava pulled a soft blanket from a nearby supply cart, draping it over Lena's small, shivering shoulders. "I know, sweetheart," she murmured. "You did the right thing. You got help." The ER doors burst open. A stretcher was rushed inside, paramedics flanking both sides. Ava's heart dropped when she saw Lena's grandmother. The elderly woman lay motionless, her face pale and bruised, an oxygen mask strapped over her mouth. Lena stiffened beside Ava, her tiny fingers digging into the nurse's arm as the stretcher passed. "She's in good hands now," Ava promised, her voice calm but firm. But as she watched the trauma team surround the unconscious woman, Ava's mind was racing. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was something much, much worse. Lena didn't move. Her wide, frightened eyes followed the stretcher as the paramedics wheeled her grandmother through the trauma bay doors. The moment seemed frozen in time, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows, the steady beep of monitors, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. Ava felt the little girl gripping her sleeve, her small fingers twisting into the fabric as if letting go would make everything worse. "She's in good hands now, sweetheart." Ava reassured her gently that the doctors are going to do everything they can. Lena didn't respond. Her tiny shoulders shook as she stared after the stretcher, tears silently sliding down her dirt-streaked face. Ava glanced around. Too many people were watching. Patients, nurses, a few visitors. They all paused for a brief second, drawn by the sight of a child arriving alone, terrified and desperate. Lena didn't need an audience. She needed safety. "Come on, let's go somewhere quieter," Ava said softly, wrapping an arm around Lena's small shoulders and guiding her toward a waiting area down the hall. It was tucked away near the pediatric ward, with soft chairs and a vending machine humming quietly in the corner. Lena climbed onto one of the chairs, pulling her knees up to her chest. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her fingers twisting in its worn fabric. Ava crouched beside her. "Lena, sweetheart," she said carefully, "I know you're scared, but I need to ask you a few more questions, okay?" Lena wiped her nose with the sleeve of her pajama top and nodded slightly. "You said you hid under the table. Do you remember how many people were in the house?" Lena's brows furrowed, and she shook her head. "I don't know. I didn't look. I just heard them." Ava hesitated before asking, "Did you hear what they were saying?" Lena squeezed her bear tighter. "They were mad at Grandma." Ava felt a chill crawl up her spine. Why were they mad at her? Lena's breath hitched. They kept saying she should have told them something. Ava's fingers curled slightly on her lap. This wasn't just a random break-in. Before she could ask anything else, her radio crackled to life. "Detective Easton just arrived. Wants a full update." Ava exhaled. Finally, she turned back to Lena. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to a police officer for a minute, but I'll be right back, I promise." Lena hesitated, her fingers gripping Ava's wrist for a second longer than necessary before finally letting go. Ava gave her a reassuring smile, then stood and hurried toward the ER entrance. Detective Ryan Easton stepped through the sliding glass doors of Ridgeview General, the weight of urgency settling over him like a storm cloud. He was still in his button-down shirt from earlier in the evening, sleeves rolled up, his holster clipped to his belt. He had come straight from the crime scene, but he needed more information, fast. A young nurse with sharp green eyes approached him. "Detective Easton?" He nodded. "That's me." She extended a hand. "Ava Reynolds. I was the first to talk to the girl when she arrived." Easton shook her hand, getting straight to the point. "What do we know?" Ava didn't hesitate. "Her name is Lena. She's 7. She came in alone, covered in dirt, crying. She told me someone attacked her grandmother, who's now in critical condition. Severe head trauma, possible internal injuries." Easton's jaw tightened. "Was it a break-in?" Ava nodded. "Seems like it, but there's something more." Lena said the attackers were looking for something. Easton's eyes sharpened. "Did she say what?" "No, but she said her grandmother told her to hide under the table when it happened." Easton exhaled through his nose. That meant the old woman had seen them coming. She had known something was wrong. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes narrowing at the caller ID. One of his officers from the crime scene. "Easton," he answered. "Detective, you're going to want to hear this." Something in the officer's tone made Easton's stomach tighten. "Go ahead." "We're still processing the house, but it's a mess, like someone was desperately searching for something. Furniture overturned, drawers ripped out, a window shattered, and we found something." Easton's grip on the phone tightened. "What?" "A safe." That made Easton pause mid-step. Ava must have noticed the shift in his expression, because she tilted her head slightly, waiting for him to continue. "The safe was open," the officer continued, "and empty." Easton's mind raced. Who got to it first? The intruders? Or someone else? "Any signs of forced entry on it?" he asked. "No. Either someone had the combination, or they knew another way in." Easton muttered a curse. The pieces were falling into place, and he didn't like where they were leading. "I'll call you back," he said, hanging up. Then he turned to Ava. "Where's the girl?" Ava gestured toward the hallway. "She's in the waiting area. She's still in shock, but she might know more." Easton nodded, already moving toward the hallway. As they approached, his phone buzzed again. Another officer. "What now?" Easton muttered, answering. "Detective, we have a witness. Elderly neighbor across the street. Says he saw 2 men running from the house." Easton stopped walking. Description: one was tall, broad shoulders, the other had a limp. Easton's pulse quickened. A limp. That was a distinguishing feature. What about their vehicle? Black SUV, new model, no plates. Easton closed his eyes briefly, processing. Two men, one injured, looking for something they didn't find. This wasn't some random robbery. This was deliberate. He ended the call and turned back to Ava. "I need to talk to Lena," he said. Ava nodded. "I'll be with her." As they reached the waiting area, Easton's mind raced. If the men hadn't found what they were looking for, they wouldn't stop, and that meant Lena might still be in danger. Lena sat in the waiting area, her tiny hands gripping the edges of her stuffed bear so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The overhead lights buzzed softly, casting a dim glow over the quiet space. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the hallway, where her grandmother had been taken. She hadn't moved since they wheeled her away. Ava sat beside her, keeping her voice gentle. "Detective Easton is here, sweetheart. He's going to ask you a few questions, but I'll stay with you the whole time. Okay?" Lena gave the smallest nod. Easton pulled up a chair, positioning himself at eye level. He had dealt with frightened kids before. They needed patience, not pressure. "Hey, Lena," he said, keeping his voice calm. "My name is Ryan. I'm a detective. I heard you were really brave tonight." Lena didn't say anything. She just pulled her knees to her chest and stared at the floor. Easton exchanged a quick glance with Ava before trying again. "I know you're scared, but I need your help, kiddo. Your grandma is really hurt, and we need to find out who did it." Lena swallowed hard, her small frame trembling. After a long pause, she whispered, "They were looking for something." Easton leaned forward slightly, his pulse kicking up a notch. "What were they looking for?" Lena shook her head, her dark hair falling into her face. "I don't know." Easton kept his expression neutral, though his mind was already racing. "Did your grandma ever talk about something important? Maybe something she kept in a special place?" Lena froze, her fingers twisted in the fabric of her bear. Ava noticed it too and gently rubbed her back. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe here." Lena's lips quivered, her voice barely above a whisper. "She had a box." Easton's muscles tensed. "A box. Can you tell me what kind of box, sweetheart?" Ava asked gently. Lena hesitated. "It was metal. She kept it in the closet." Easton felt a sharp jolt of realization. The safe. What was inside? Lena shook her head quickly. "I don't know, but she always said if something happened, I should never tell anyone about it." Easton's jaw tightened. Margaret had known this was coming. She had been prepared. If the intruders had found the safe open and empty, then someone else had gotten to it first. And now, the people who wanted it were getting desperate. Half an hour later, Easton pulled up outside Margaret Holloway's house. The small, single-story home sat dark and lifeless under the glow of the streetlights. The front door was slightly ajar, crime scene tape fluttering in the night breeze. As Easton stepped out of his car, he took in the scene. The living room was a wreck, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, the couch cushions slashed apart, stuffing spilling onto the floor. A broken lamp lay shattered in the corner, its bulb crushed under a heavy boot print. Whoever had done this wasn't looking for cash or jewelry. They had been searching. "Detective," an officer called from the hallway. "You'll want to see this." Easton followed him into a small bedroom, where the closet door stood wide open. Inside, the back panel had been removed, exposing an empty space where the safe had been. Easton crouched, running his fingers along the dust-lined floor. It was gone. His gut twisted. The intruders had been furious. Had they been too late? Had someone else gotten to it first? That meant this wasn't over. Outside, an elderly man in a thick coat stood on the sidewalk, his arms crossed. His expression was grim. "You saw something?" Easton asked. The man nodded. "I was up late watching TV, heard glass break, so I looked outside." "What did you see?" The man squinted. "Two men running out of the house." Easton's focus sharpened. "Can you describe them?" One was tall, broad shoulders. The other, the man hesitated, had a limp. Easton's pulse spiked. A limp. That was a distinctive detail. "What about their car?" "Black SUV," the man said. "New model. Took off real fast." Easton muttered a curse under his breath. Two men, one injured, the getaway car ready to go. This wasn't just some break-in, it was organized, deliberate. He handed the old man a card. "If you remember anything else, call me." The man nodded. You find these guys, detective. They don't belong on the streets. Easton's jaw tightened. That's the plan. As he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed again. He answered, already bracing for bad news. Easton? It was Ava. Her voice was tight with urgency. Lena just remembered something else. Easton stopped mid-step. What is it? There was a pause. Then Ava said, she heard one of the men say, we don't have much time. Easton's blood ran cold. They weren't just looking for something. They were on a deadline. And that meant, whatever this was about, it wasn't over. Easton gripped the steering wheel tighter as he maneuvered through the dark streets, his mind racing. We don't have much time. What did that mean? Were the attackers still after whatever had been in that safe? Or had they already moved on to their next target? He pulled into the precinct's lot, parking in his usual spot. He barely had time to shut the car door before his phone buzzed again. A hospital number. Easton, he answered quickly. It's Ava. Her voice was steady but laced with urgency. Margaret is still unconscious, but I'm staying with Lena. She's exhausted, but she refuses to sleep. She's afraid. Easton sighed, running a hand down his face. He didn't blame the kid. I'll be there soon, he promised. Keep her close. I don't like that we don't know who these guys are yet. As soon as he stepped into the precinct, an officer met him in the hallway. Detective, we processed the scene at Margaret Holloway's house. You were right, whoever was there was looking for something specific. No valuables were taken, just destruction. Easton nodded. The safe? The officer's expression darkened. We dusted for prints, but nothing solid yet. Forensics is still working on it. Easton kept walking. Anything else? A neighbor saw two men fleeing in a black SUV. One had a limp. Easton clenched his jaw. The same detail Lena mentioned. That narrows our suspect pool, he muttered. If one of them is injured, they'll be easier to track. The officer hesitated. There's one more thing. A few streets over, a patrol unit found a burner phone tossed in a dumpster. We're pulling what we can from it, but it was wiped clean. Easton's stomach twisted. Someone was covering their tracks. Looks that way. Easton nodded. Let me know as soon as anything comes through. Back at the hospital, Ava kept a close eye on Lena. The little girl sat in a chair near the nurse's station. Her stuffed bear still clutched in her arms. Her eyelids drooped, but every time her head started to fall forward, she jerked back awake. Ava crouched beside her. Lena, sweetheart, you can rest. I'll be right here. Lena shook her head. What if they come back? Ava's chest tightened. They won't, she reassured her. You're safe here. Detective Easton is working hard to find them. Lena looked down at her bear, running her fingers over its worn fabric. They hurt Grandma because of the box, didn't they? Ava hesitated. I don't know, sweetheart, but we're gonna find out. Lena's fingers trembled. Grandma told me never to tell anyone about it. Ava placed a gentle hand on hers. Your grandma was just trying to protect you, but right now we need to protect her. Lena swallowed hard, then whispered something so softly Ava almost didn't hear it. She hid something in the attic. Ava's breath hitched. The attic? Before she could ask more, the doors to the hospital slammed open and Easton strode in, his eyes scanning the room. When he spotted them, he made his way over. Ava met him halfway, lowering her voice. She just told me something new, she murmured. Easton raised an eyebrow. What? She said her grandmother hid something in the attic. Easton's eyes darkened. That meant two things. Whatever was in the safe might not have been the real target. The people who attacked Margaret might come back to finish the job. He turned to Lena, keeping his voice calm but firm. Sweetheart, do you know what your grandma hid up there? Lena shook her head, looking down. She just told me never to go in there. Easton glanced at Ava. I need to get back to that house. Ava frowned. Shouldn't you wait for a warrant? I'm not touching anything, Easton assured her. Just taking a look. Ava hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. Easton turned back to Lena. You did the right thing telling us, kiddo. We're going to make sure no one hurts your grandma again. Lena nodded sleepily, but her fingers still clung tightly to Ava's sleeve. Easton had seen it before. Kids holding on to the one person keeping them steady in a storm. He just hoped he could stop that storm before it got worse. Margaret's house was eerily silent when Easton arrived. The front door was still slightly ajar. The police tape stretched across it like a wound barely held together. He stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and something metallic. His boots crunched against broken glass as he made his way toward the hallway. If there was an attic, there had to be an entrance somewhere. Then he saw it. A small pull-down hatch in the ceiling, barely noticeable among the shadows. He reached up and tugged the cord. The ladder creaked loudly as it unfolded. The attic was pitch black. He climbed up carefully, his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows across the cramped space. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by his movements. And then, in the farthest corner, he saw it. A small wooden chest tucked beneath insulation and covered in an old blanket. Easton's heart pounded. This was it. He pulled out his phone, snapping a picture before carefully making his way back down. He wasn't going to open it here, not without backup and proper handling. As he stepped onto the floor, his phone buzzed. A text from Ava. Lena just woke up screaming. She says they're coming back. Easton's blood turned to ice. Easton barely processed Ava's text before he was moving. He jogged down the front steps of Margaret's house, heart pounding as he rushed to his car. The attic discovery could wait. Right now, Lena was in danger. Sliding into the driver's seat, he turned on his lights and pulled out onto the road. The hospital was 10 minutes away if he obeyed traffic laws. He wasn't planning on obeying traffic laws. He pressed the call button on his dash. Ava answered on the first ring. She woke up screaming, she said, her voice tight. She kept saying they're coming back. Easton's grip on the wheel tightened. Did she see something? I don't know, Ava admitted. She was shaking too hard to talk, and now she won't let go of me. Easton exhaled sharply. I'm almost there. Don't leave her side. I wasn't planning on it. The line went dead. He hit the gas harder. By the time Easton pulled into the hospital parking lot, 2 patrol cars were already stationed outside. Good. He had radioed ahead, ordering increased security the moment he got Ava's text. He pushed through the ER doors and spotted Ava immediately. She sat in the waiting area, Lena curled up against her, tiny hands clutching her scrub top like she was afraid to let go. The little girl's eyes were wide, darting toward every shadow like something was hiding there. Ava looked up as Easton approached. She won't talk, she murmured. Easton crouched beside the chair, keeping his voice low. Lena, sweetheart, you're safe here. I promise. Can you tell me what scared you? Lena shook her head violently. Her breath hitched as she buried her face in Ava's shoulder. Ava rubbed small circles on her back. It's okay, baby. You don't have to be scared. Easton waited a moment, then glanced toward the nearest officer. Security sweep? Done. No suspicious activity so far, the officer reported. We have 2 men posted at the entrance, another 2 outside the patient wing. Easton nodded. Good, but not good enough. I want another pair by the back exits, he ordered. And eyes on the cameras. If anyone so much as breathes wrong near this hospital, I want to know. The officer nodded and stepped away to make the calls. Easton turned back to Ava and Lena. Listen, kiddo, he said softly. I know it's hard, but I need you to be really brave and tell me what happened. Did you see someone? Lena still wouldn't speak, but her small fingers twitched against Ava's shirt. Ava noticed it too. Lena, she coaxed. The little girl finally pulled back, her eyes wet with unshed tears. Her voice was barely a whisper. They were outside. Easton's stomach dropped. He stood immediately, heading toward the front doors. The officers snapped to attention when he stepped outside. Anyone out here? He demanded. The officer nearest to him shook his head. No one suspicious. Easton scanned the parking lot anyway, his sharp gaze flicking between the street lamps, the alleyways, the darkened corners where shadows stretched just a little too long. He saw nothing, but that didn't mean no one was there. His phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. The message was from a blocked number. You're too late. A spike of cold fury shot through him. He turned, storming back into the hospital. Ava stood as he approached. What is it? He showed her the screen. Her face paled. Lena tensed, watching them both carefully. Ava took a slow breath, then turned to the little girl. Sweetheart, did you recognize them? The men outside? Lena shook her head. I didn't see faces, just dark shapes. Easton tucked his phone away. Someone was playing games with him. They had been here, watching, waiting. And if they weren't coming after Lena? His stomach clenched. They were after Margaret. Margaret's hospital room was dim, the only light coming from the monitors softly beeping beside her bed. The rhythmic sound of her breathing filled the quiet space. Easton stepped inside, his eyes immediately sweeping the room. No signs of forced entry, no one hiding in the corners. But the feeling in his gut told him he was right. They would try again. He took out his phone and dialed. The call connected on the first ring. "Captain," he said, "I need a full lockdown on Margaret Holloway's room. No one in or out without clearance." His captain sighed. "That bad?" "They're watching the hospital," Easton said. "They want her dead before she wakes up." "All right, I'll send 2 more uniforms your way." "Make it 3, Easton said darkly. "And one of them stays in this room." His captain muttered something under his breath but agreed. The line went dead. Easton stood in the doorway for another moment, watching Margaret's still form. "She's the key," he murmured. "She knows what's in that attic." And someone out there was terrified of what she might say. Back in the waiting area, Ava still held Lena, her fingers running through the little girl's hair in soothing strokes. Easton crouched beside them again. "Lena, sweetheart, I need to ask you one more thing." Lena looked at him with tired, wary eyes. "The attic," he said carefully. "Do you know where your grandma kept the key?" Lena hesitated. Then slowly she pointed to the stuffed bear in her lap. Easton blinked. "Inside the bear?" Lena nodded, hugging it tighter. Ava and Easton exchanged a glance. Easton's pulse kicked up. If the key was inside that bear, that meant Margaret had planned ahead. And whatever was in that attic, it was worth killing for. Easton stared at the stuffed bear, his mind racing. Margaret had hidden the attic key inside it. That meant she knew someone would come looking for it. She had been preparing for this. Lena clutched the bear tighter, her small hands gripping the worn fabric as if letting go would make everything worse. Ava glanced between them before speaking gently. "Lena, sweetheart, can we look inside your bear? Just to find the key?" Lena hesitated. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. Ava reached for a pair of medical scissors from the nearby supply cart. She turned the bear over, running her fingers along the seams until she felt something hard and solid inside. Carefully, she snipped along one of the stitches. Within seconds, a small silver key slid out into her palm. Easton picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. It was old, worn. The kind of key that belonged to an attic door in an old house, one that held secrets no one was meant to find. Lena's lip trembled. "Grandma told me to keep it safe." "You did a great job, sweetheart," Ava reassured her. "You kept it safe, and now Detective Easton is going to find out what Grandma was hiding." Lena blinked up at Easton, fear still clouding her eyes. "Will they come back?" Easton clenched his jaw. "Not if I can help it." He turned to Ava. "Stay with her. Don't let her out of your sight." Ava nodded. "Be careful." Easton didn't plan on being careful. He planned on finding out exactly what Margaret Holloway had hidden. It was just past midnight when Easton pulled up outside Margaret's house. The place looked even darker now, the windows black and hollow, the yellow crime scene tape still fluttering against the cold wind. He stepped out of his car, flashlight in hand, scanning the street for any signs of movement. Nothing. But that didn't mean he was alone. As he approached the house, he reached for his gun, flicking off the safety. He didn't trust that whoever had ransacked this place was done looking. The front door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, still carrying the scent of dust and something faintly metallic, maybe blood. The mess was exactly as he'd left it. Furniture overturned, glass shattered, desperation lingering in every corner. Whoever had broken in was searching for something they didn't find. That meant whatever Margaret had hidden was still here. Easton made his way down the hallway, his footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. He stopped beneath the attic hatch. The same pull-down ladder he had spotted earlier was still there, the small latch just waiting to be unlocked. Easton reached up, inserting the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. His pulse kicked up. Slowly, he pulled the ladder down, the wood groaning in protest as it unfolded. A gust of cool, musty air rushed down from the darkness above. Easton climbed. His flashlight cut through the thick dust swirling in the air. The attic was cramped and cluttered, filled with old boxes, yellowed newspapers, and the faint scent of mothballs. And then he saw it. A small wooden chest, tucked into the farthest corner, partially hidden beneath an old blanket. Easton moved toward it, stepping carefully over the creaky floorboards. He crouched, brushing off the thick layer of dust covering the chest's lid. The lock was already broken. Someone had tried to get inside before, but they didn't finish the job. With one final glance around, Easton lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in an old cloth, was a stack of neatly organized files, and on top, placed carefully as if it were the most important piece of all, a flash drive. Easton's stomach tightened. Whatever was on this drive, someone had been willing to kill for it. He carefully picked it up, tucking it into his pocket before turning back to the files. He flipped through the first few pages and froze. Names, account numbers, transaction records. Margaret hadn't just hidden family keepsakes up here. She had been keeping records, and judging by the names he was seeing, very powerful people were involved. Easton exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a break-in. This was about something much bigger. He quickly gathered the files, stuffing them into his jacket before carefully backing out of the attic. As he descended the ladder, he pulled out his phone. He needed backup. Now, the second his feet hit the ground, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. Another blocked number. You should have stayed out of it. Easton spun around, gun raised, scanning the shadows. No one was there, but they were watching. And now, they knew he had what they wanted. Easton's grip on his gun tightened as he scanned the darkness surrounding Margaret's house. The street was empty. The trees barely swayed in the wind. No footsteps, no sounds of an approaching car. But he knew better. Whoever had sent that message was watching him. His heartbeat hammered in his ears, but his movement stayed controlled. He kept his weapon steady as he slowly backed toward his car, his other hand reaching into his pocket for the flash drive. If someone was going to come for it, they wouldn't be patient. Sliding into the driver's seat, he locked the doors, started the engine, and peeled away from the curb. His phone buzzed again. He glanced down. Another blocked number. Turn around. You don't want to do this. Easton let out a humorless laugh. Too late for that. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and pressed harder on the gas. The precinct was quiet when Easton arrived, save the glow of desk lamps flickering across stacks of paperwork and tired officers nursing cold coffee. As he strode in, his partner, Jenna Morales, looked up from her desk. "Tell me you've got something," she said, rubbing her eyes. Easton pulled the flash drive from his pocket, setting it on the desk between them. Morales straightened. "Is that what I think it is?" "I don't know yet," Easton admitted, "but Margaret Holloway hid it like her life depended on it. Considering she's in a coma, I'd say it did." Morales reached for the drive. "Let's see what's on it." They moved to the forensic lab, where a tech specialist, Reed, sat behind a row of monitors. He was already running prints on evidence from the Holloway case when Easton placed the flash drive in front of him. "Think you can crack this?" Easton asked. Reed raised an eyebrow. "Depends. If it's encrypted, I'll need time." "Then don't waste any," Morales said. Reed sighed, plugging the drive into a secure computer. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Ava's voice crackled over Easton's phone. He answered on the first ring. "Talk to me." "I don't like this," she said, her tone tight with concern. "Lena's still restless. I know she's just a kid, but I feel like, I don't know, she senses something." Easton exhaled. "I got another message. They know I have the drive." Ava cursed under her breath. "What do we do?" Easton glanced at the screen. The progress bar jumped to 90%. "We figure out what's on this thing," he said. A soft chime sounded. Reed leaned forward. "We're in." Easton and Morales stepped closer. The screen filled with folders of documents, financial records, and hidden transactions. Margaret hadn't just been keeping secrets. She had proof. Morales skimmed through one of the files, her face going pale. "Holy shit." Easton followed her gaze. The documents listed bank accounts, offshore transfers, bribes, all connected to one name. Robert Calloway. Easton's blood ran cold. Calloway wasn't just some small-time crook. He was one of the biggest corporate players in the city, with deep political connections and a reputation that no one dared to question. But Margaret had questioned it, and now someone had tried to silence her. Morales clicked on a video file embedded in one of the folders. The screen flickered, and grainy security footage began playing. A meeting room. A long table. Several men in suits, and at the head of the table, Calloway himself. The audio was muffled, but the words were clear enough. "The Holloway woman is a problem." A chill crawled down Easton's spine. Calloway had ordered this. Margaret had gotten too close to something she wasn't supposed to see, and now Easton had proof. The video ended. Silence filled the room. Then Reed muttered, "You guys are so screwed." Easton turned to Morales. "We need to move, now." She was already grabbing her jacket. Yeah, no shit. They had evidence. And if Calloway knew they had it, they wouldn't be safe for long. Back at the hospital, Ava couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. Lena had finally fallen asleep, curled up in one of the hospital beds in a private room, but her face was still tense, like she was stuck in a nightmare. Ava glanced at the officers standing outside the door. Security had been tripled, but she still didn't feel safe. She checked the clock. 1:42 a.m. The hospital halls were quieter now, most visitors long gone. Only the night shift nurses and a few emergency cases passed by occasionally. A soft sound made her turn. The door to Margaret's room had shifted slightly. Ava's pulse spiked. She had been standing here long enough to know the door had been closed all night. She took a cautious step forward, pushing it open. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the monitors. Margaret lay still, her breathing steady, but something felt off. Then she saw it. The window. It was unlocked. Ava's breath caught. She turned toward the bed, just as a shadow moved. Before she could react, a hand clamped over her mouth. A voice whispered in her ear. Too late. Ava's heart slammed against her ribs as the hand tightened over her mouth. The grip was strong, rough fingers pressing against her cheek. She struggled, twisting in the hold, but the intruder's cold breath brushed her ear as he whispered again. Don't fight. Screw that. Ava threw her elbow back hard, connecting with something solid, a rib cage. The man grunted, but his grip barely loosened. He was strong, trained. Her mind raced. Think. If he was here for Margaret, she couldn't let him reach the bed. With every ounce of strength, she stomped down on his foot, then twisted at the same time, breaking free just enough to turn and swing her fist. She caught a glimpse of him, tall, dark clothing, a mask covering the lower half of his face, before her knuckles cracked against his jaw. The force knocked him back a step, but he recovered fast. Ava barely had time to react before he lunged again. The hospital alarm blared to life. Red emergency lights flashed in the hallway. The officers stationed outside were already moving. The intruder snarled, realizing his time was up. He whipped around, reaching inside his jacket. Gun. Ava dove for cover just as a gunshot shattered the air. The bullet lodged into the hospital wall. A second shot fired, but this time it wasn't from him. The officers had their weapons drawn, firing back. The man bolted. Glass exploded as he threw himself out the unlocked window, disappearing into the night. Ava scrambled to her feet, her breathing ragged. Margaret was still unconscious, undisturbed by the chaos. The officers rushed past her, shouting into their radios as they chased after him. Ava pressed a shaking hand to her forehead. That was too close. Easton's car skidded to a stop outside the hospital. The flashing red lights, the sound of sirens, not a good sign. He was already out of the car before the engine shut off. He shoved past the front doors, scanning for Ava. Then he saw her. She was standing in the hallway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. There was a smear of blood on her sleeve. His stomach dropped. Ava, he said urgently, reaching her in 3 quick strides. Are you hurt? She blinked, like she was just realizing he was there. What? No, it's not mine. His relief was instant, but it didn't last long. What the hell happened? He demanded. Ava took a deep breath. They came for Margaret. Easton's pulse spiked. Where is she? Still here. They didn't get to her. But Easton, it was close. He didn't doubt that for a second. An officer ran up, panting. The shooter's gone. Slipped through the back lot before we could box him in. Security footage shows him getting into a black SUV. Easton clenched his jaw. The same SUV from the break-in. They're getting desperate, he muttered. They already were, Ava said grimly. Now they know Margaret is still alive. Which meant they would try again. Easton turned to the officer. Get a lockdown on this entire wing. No one in or out without clearance. And put an extra man on Lena's room. Yes, sir. The officer jogged off. Easton turned back to Ava. Tell me everything. 15 minutes later, they were in a private security room, reviewing the hospital footage. The grainy video showed the intruder slipping in through the side entrance, avoiding cameras as much as possible. He was careful. Too careful. He knew the layout, Ava murmured. He knew exactly where to go. Easton agreed. And that means someone on the inside helped him. Ava's eyes darkened. Someone at the hospital? Or law enforcement? Neither answer was good. Easton rubbed a hand down his face. We need to move on, Calloway. Fast. The guy who ordered the hit? Yeah, Easton said. The files from the flash drive, they tie everything back to him. If we bring him in now, we might cut off the attacks before they get worse. Worse? Ava repeated. Easton, they just tried to kill a woman in a hospital. How much worse can it get? Easton's jaw tightened. We're about to find out. He pulled out his phone, dialing his captain. We have enough to take Calloway down, he said as soon as the line picked up. His captain sighed. You sure about that? Easton glanced at the screen where Calloway's name was plastered all over the financial documents. Yeah, he said, I'm sure. By the time Easton and his team arrived at Calloway's estate, the place was crawling with officers. Floodlights illuminated the mansion's long driveway, their beams bouncing off expensive cars parked neatly in a row. Easton adjusted his bulletproof vest, eyes locked on the front entrance. No way was Calloway going to walk out of this one. Morales jogged up beside him. Surveillance says he's still inside. No sign of an escape attempt. Easton nodded. Then let's not give him time to start. With a sharp motion, he signaled for the entry team to move. A battering ram smashed through the front door. Police! Someone shouted. Hands in the air. Easton stormed in, gun raised, sweeping the grand hallway. Calloway stood near the fireplace wearing a tailored suit and an infuriating smirk. Ah, he drawled. Detective Easton, you really should call ahead. Easton gritted his teeth. You're under arrest, he snapped. Step away from the desk. Calloway raised an eyebrow. Arrest? Now, that's a strong word. Morales stepped forward, flipping through one of the documents they had recovered. Strong words for strong evidence. Calloway laughed. Then, without warning, he reached inside his jacket. Easton's fingers squeezed the trigger before he even thought about it. A shot rang out. Calloway staggered back, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. Officers swarmed him, forcing him to the ground. Easton stood over him, his gun still raised. Try that again, he said coldly. I dare you. Calloway gritted his teeth, breathing hard, but for the first time the cocky smirk was gone. They had him. Finally. Back at the hospital, Ava sat beside Lena's bed, exhaustion weighing down her limbs. Lena stirred, blinking blearily. Is it over? She mumbled. Ava brushed a piece of hair from the little girl's face. Almost, sweetheart. Lena let out a tiny sigh, then curled up against the pillow. Okay. As she drifted back into sleep, Ava felt a small, cautious relief. They had survived the night. But this wasn't over yet. Not even close. The precinct buzzed with tension. Officers moved between desks, talking in hushed voices, some casting quick glances toward the interrogation rooms. Behind one of those glass walls, Robert Calloway sat cuffed to a metal table, his expensive suit wrinkled, his shoulder bandaged from the gunshot. Easton stood outside, watching through the two-way mirror. Morales leaned against the doorway. He hasn't said a word. Easton exhaled. He will. Morales studied Calloway's expressionless face. You think he's scared? Easton let out a humorless laugh. Not yet, but he will be. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Calloway barely looked up. Detective, he said, his voice smooth as ever. To what do I owe the pleasure? Easton pulled out a chair across from him. Robert Calloway, you're facing charges of conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. Calloway smirked. That's quite a list. You should hear the full version, Easton shot back. It's a real page-turner. Calloway sighed, tapping his fingers on the table. You think you've won, don't you? Easton leaned forward. You tried to kill an old woman to cover up your crimes. You sent men after a 7-year-old girl. And now you're sitting in cuffs. He tilted his head. Yeah, I'd say we're winning. Calloway's smirk faltered just slightly. Then, with a slow breath, he sat back. You think arresting me changes anything? Easton's jaw tightened. You don't run this city, Calloway. Calloway chuckled. You're wrong about that. He lifted his bound hand slightly, leaning in. You have no idea what's coming, detective. Something in his voice sent a chill up Easton's spine. Calloway's eyes flickered toward the mirror. They'll never let me stay in here. They? Morales spoke up from the corner. Calloway just smiled. And for the first time since the case began, Easton felt a real sense of unease. Who the hell was Calloway protecting? At the hospital, Ava sat in Lena's room, flipping through a children's book while the little girl slept soundly beside her. She had barely left Lena's side. Even with Calloway in custody, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her phone vibrated on the table. "Easton," she answered quickly. "Tell me you got something." "I got Calloway," Easton said, "but he's way too calm." Ava frowned. "What do you mean?" "He thinks he's getting out of this." Ava's chest tightened. "Can he?" Easton exhaled. "Not legally, but I don't think legal is how this works for him." Ava's stomach sank. Before she could respond, she noticed something. The hallway outside Lena's room was too quiet. There should have been officers outside the door. She stood slowly. "Easton, something's wrong." "What?" She reached for the handle, heart pounding. "The guards." Before she could finish, the lights cut out. The room plunged into darkness. Ava froze. A second later, the emergency backup lights flickered on, bathing everything in red. Lena stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Ava?" Ava grabbed her phone, switching on the flashlight. "Stay close to me, sweetheart." The hallway was empty. The two officers stationed outside were gone. Her heart pounded. "Easton," she whispered into the phone, "we have a problem." Then she heard it. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the far end of the hallway. Ava grabbed Lena and moved. She threw open the door to an empty supply closet, ushering Lena inside. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I say." Lena's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded. Ava closed the door, her body shielding it as she turned to face the hallway. The footsteps were getting closer. Easton ran. He had barely processed Ava's whispered warning before he was sprinting out of the precinct. His tires screeched as he tore out of the lot, sirens blaring. The hospital was minutes away, but that wasn't fast enough. His mind replayed Calloway's smug words. "You have no idea what's coming. Had this been the plan all along? Get arrested as a distraction? If so, who the hell was coming for Lena?" Ava pressed herself against the closet door, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then a soft creak as the door to Lena's hospital room slowly swung open. Ava's breath caught. Whoever it was, they were inside the room. She heard movement, a rustling. Then, a low voice muttering, "Where is she?" They were looking for Lena. Ava's fingers tightened into fists. She wouldn't let them take her. Not a chance in hell. Then, the closet door ripped open. The closet door ripped open. Ava reacted instantly. She lunged forward, using her entire body weight to slam into the intruder. The man stumbled back, caught off guard, but he was fast, trained. Ava barely had time to register his dark clothing, his masked face before he swung at her. She ducked, barely missing the blow, then drove her knee into his ribs. He grunted but didn't go down. Instead, he grabbed her by the arm and shoved her hard against the wall. Pain exploded through her shoulder. Lena let out a frightened whimper from inside the closet. Ava saw the man turn toward her. No, she grabbed the nearest thing, a metal IV pole, and swung. The pole crashed against the intruder's side, knocking him off balance. Ava didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lena from the closet and ran. The hospital was chaos. The emergency lights flashed red, alarms blaring through the halls. Other nurses and doctors were scrambling, confused and panicked. Ava held Lena close, her mind racing. She had to get out, had to get to Easton. Behind her, she heard the heavy footsteps of the intruder recovering. Then, gunfire. Bullets ripped through the hallway, shattering glass and plaster. Ava ducked behind a nurse's station, shielding Lena with her body. The little girl was shaking violently, her small fingers gripping Ava's scrubs. The masked man reloaded his gun, stepping closer. Ava's heart pounded. Then, the gunshot rang out. The intruder jerked back, blood spraying across the floor. Ava turned just in time to see Detective Easton standing at the end of the hallway, gun raised, breathing hard. "Get down," he shouted. Ava grabbed Lena and ducked as Easton fired again, hitting the second intruder just as he appeared from a side hallway. Both men collapsed. Silence hung in the air. Ava's breath came fast, shaky. Lena was clutching her, sobbing. Then Easton was there, crouching beside them. "You okay?" he asked, scanning them both. Ava nodded, still catching her breath. "Lena, she's fine, just scared." Easton glanced at the bodies, then back at them. "This wasn't a hit," he murmured. Ava's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Easton's jaw tightened. "They weren't here to kill. They were here to take her." Ava's stomach dropped. "Why?" she whispered. But Easton already knew. Because Margaret wasn't the only one who knew the truth about Calloway. Lena had been there that night, and now someone wanted her gone. Back at the precinct, Easton paced outside the interrogation room, adrenaline still burning through his veins. They had one survivor. The second intruder had bled out before paramedics arrived. But the first, the one Ava fought, had barely made it. Now he sat slumped in a chair, wrists cuffed to the table, blood still drying on his shirt. Easton stepped inside. The man didn't look up. Easton pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Talk. Nothing. Easton exhaled sharply. Who sent you? Silence. His patience snapped. He slammed a hand on the table. You were there to take a kid. You think I won't make sure you never see the outside of a prison cell again? Still, the man didn't speak. Then, a smirk. You're too late, the man murmured. Easton's spine went rigid. What does that mean? The man leaned forward slightly. It doesn't matter what you found. It doesn't matter what evidence you think you have. His smirk widened. Calloway isn't the one pulling the strings. Easton's breath hitched. Then the man said something that made his blood turn to ice. This goes higher than you can imagine. At the hospital, Ava sat beside Lena, running her fingers through the little girl's tangled hair. She had finally fallen asleep after hours of crying. Ava felt like she could finally breathe. Then her phone buzzed. It was Easton. She picked up immediately. Tell me you have answers. Easton's voice was grim. Ava, listen to me. Calloway wasn't acting alone. Ava's stomach clenched. What? This whole thing, the break-in, the attacks, the hospital, it's bigger than him. Bigger than we thought. Ava's hand tightened on the blanket covering Lena. How much bigger? She whispered. Easton's pause was too long. Then he said, I don't know yet, but we just kicked a hornet's nest. Ava exhaled shakily. What do we do? Easton's voice was dead serious. We protect Lena. Ava looked down at the little girl, curled up beside her, still clutching her stuffed bear. For the first time, she realized this wasn't over, not even close. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting long shadows across the quiet room. Ava hadn't slept. She sat in the chair beside Lena's hospital bed, exhaustion weighing heavy on her limbs. The little girl was still curled up, clutching her stuffed bear, her face relaxed in sleep. For the first time in hours, she looked peaceful. But Ava wasn't fooled. She knew the moment Lena woke up, the fear would return. And the worst part? Ava couldn't promise her it was over. Her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Easton. She answered immediately, keeping her voice low. Tell me you have something. Easton's voice was gravely tired. We're barely scratching the surface. Ava frowned. How bad? Worse than we thought. Ava exhaled, pinching the bridge of her nose. Start talking. Back at the precinct, Easton stood in front of a war board filled with Calloway's financial records, surveillance photos, and red strings connecting names. Morales flipped through a freshly printed document, shaking her head. This isn't just corporate fraud. This is full-blown organized crime. Easton crossed his arms. And Calloway wasn't at the top. No, Morales agreed, tapping one of the documents. But he was connected to someone who is. Easton stepped closer, reading the name on the paper. His blood ran cold. Senator Richard Monroe. Easton let out a slow, controlled breath. Tell me you're joking. Morales shook her head. Calloway was laundering money through shell companies, but the real power? The one pulling the strings? She tapped Monroe's name again. It's him. A sitting senator. Untouchable. Powerful. Dangerous. Easton's mind raced. Calloway had tried to eliminate Margaret because she had proof of his financial crimes. But if Calloway was just a middleman, that meant Margaret had something bigger. Something that could take down Monroe. Easton pulled out his phone and dialed. Ava answered instantly. What now? We have a bigger problem, Easton said. Margaret wasn't just holding evidence against Calloway. She has something on a senator. Ava's breath hitched. You're kidding. I wish. Silence. Then, Easton, Ava whispered, her tone suddenly sharp. I think she's waking up. Margaret's fingers twitched. Ava leaned forward, heart pounding. Margaret? The older woman's eyelids fluttered. Her breathing hitched slightly, her fingers weakly gripping the blanket. Then, her eyes opened. Ava let out a shaky breath. You're in the hospital, she said softly. You've been unconscious, but you're safe now. Margaret blinked slowly, her gaze shifting. Lena? She croaked. She's okay, Ava reassured her. She's safe. Margaret's face crumpled with relief. Her frail hand reached for Ava's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. They came, she rasped. Ava nodded. I know. But you have to tell me. What were they looking for? Margaret's chest rose and fell shakily. The files, the drive. Ava exchanged a quick glance with Easton, who had just entered the room. We have it, he told her. We know about Calloway. Margaret shook her head weakly. Not just Calloway. Easton's stomach tightened. Senator Monroe? Margaret's gaze snapped to his. You know, she whispered. Easton nodded grimly. We found the connection. Margaret's breathing was shallow, her pale fingers trembling. You don't understand. Easton leaned closer. Then help me. Margaret swallowed hard. It's not just money. Ava's pulse spiked. What do you mean? Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. Human trafficking. Silence. Ava felt sick. Easton clenched his jaw. Monroe's involved? Margaret nodded. Calloway laundered the money, but Monroe controlled the movement. People. Smuggling. Silence. Ava stared at her. And you have proof? Margaret exhaled shakily. Yes, Easton's head spun. This wasn't just political corruption. This was a full-blown criminal empire. And now they were in the middle of it. Outside the hospital, a black SUV sat parked across the street. Inside, a man in a dark suit watched the hospital entrance. His fingers drummed against the leather seat, his expression unreadable. A voice crackled over his earpiece. They know about Monroe. The man exhaled slowly. Then, in a calm, measured voice, he said, Kill them all. Easton's gut twisted as he stepped into the hospital hallway, his mind still reeling from Margaret's words. Human trafficking. Senator Monroe wasn't just laundering money, he was running a network that destroyed lives. And now, they were all on his kill list. He pulled out his phone and dialed Morales. She answered immediately. Tell me you've got good news. I wish, Easton muttered. Margaret just confirmed it. Monroe's not just corrupt. He's running human trafficking rings. Morales swore under her breath. And I assume he knows we know? Easton glanced toward the hospital entrance. His instincts screamed at him. They were being watched. He knows, Easton said darkly. We need to move. Now. Inside Margaret's room, Ava could feel the tension in the air. Margaret was still weak, her hands shaking as she tried to sit up. Don't push yourself, Ava urged. Margaret's gaze sharpened. You don't understand, she rasped. They won't stop. Ava's stomach tightened. We know. Margaret shook her head. No, I mean, they'll burn everything, every trace. They'll disappear before you can touch them. Ava frowned. What do you mean? Margaret clenched her fingers in the blanket. There's a location. A safe house. Calloway used it to move people. It's still active. Ava's heart pounded. If Margaret was right, then right now, somewhere in the city, there were victims who could still be saved. Ava turned as Easton walked back in. Margaret knows where they are. Easton's jaw tightened. Then let's go. Margaret took a shaky breath. If you go there, you won't walk away. Easton didn't hesitate. Then we go in armed. 30 minutes later, Easton and Morales pulled up outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The address Margaret had given them. Ava was already inside the SUV with Lena, keeping her far away from the chaos. Easton glanced at Morales. You ready? Morales cocked her gun. Born ready. They moved toward the building, their footsteps silent against the concrete. The place looked deserted, but Easton's gut told him otherwise. Then, a shadow moved behind one of the broken windows. Morales saw it too. We've got company. Easton raised a fist, signaling for the SWAT team to move in. The warehouse doors were kicked open, flashbangs deployed. Then, the gunfire started. Bullets ripped through the air as Easton and his team pushed forward, clearing the building. Inside, it was worse than they thought. Women, children, locked in cages. Easton's rage burned white-hot. Morales fired at a guard, taking him down before he could reach for his weapon. Easton, she shouted. He turned, just as someone lunged at him. The man was fast, but Easton was faster. He drove his elbow into the attacker's throat, then sent him sprawling with a hard kick to the ribs. As the man coughed, bloodied and gasping, Easton grabbed him by the collar. Where's Monroe? He snarled. The man grinned through the blood. You think you've won? He rasped. He's already gone. Easton's grip tightened. Where? The man just laughed. Then, a single gunshot. The attacker's body jerked, then went limp. Easton turned sharply. One of Monroe's men had killed him before he could talk. Morales shot the gunman down immediately, but it was too late. The only lead to Monroe was dead. Easton cursed. But then, a voice crackled over his radio. Detective, came Ava's urgent whisper. We have a problem. Easton froze. What happened? Ava's voice was shaky. Lena, she's gone. Easton froze. Lena was gone. The words echoed in his head, but his body had already moved. Ava, he said sharply into his radio. Where are you? Hospital parking lot, she said, her voice tight with panic. I had her right next to me. I turned for 1 second and... Stay there. Easton was already running. I'm coming. Ava's hands shook as she scanned the darkened lot. The back door of the SUV was still open. The car seat was empty. Lena was just gone. Ava's stomach twisted painfully. She had failed her. Her heart pounded violently as she turned in frantic circles. Lena, no answer. Then a car screeched away from the far end of the lot. Ava's head snapped toward it. A black SUV. No, 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 no. She sprinted after it, but the car was already speeding onto the highway. Her hands fumbled for her radio. Easton, they took her. Black SUV heading north. Easton's voice came back instantly. I see it. Stay put, I'm on them. Ava gasped for air there, watching helplessly as the SUV disappeared in the distance. Then she turned back to the hospital entrance and froze. A man stood there, leaning casually against a parked car, watching her. Ava's blood ran cold. He wasn't rushing to escape. He was waiting. Slowly he smirked, and then he lifted his phone and sent a text. Ava's phone buzzed immediately. She didn't want to look. But she did. We have the girl. Ava's breath hitched. Another text came through. You want her back? Come alone. Ava's hands tightened into fists. Not a chance. She pulled her gun and aimed it at the man. Where is she? The man didn't flinch. Instead, he just smiled. Then, before Ava could react, he raised his hands and got down on his knees, surrendering. Ava hesitated. Then realization hit her like a brick. This wasn't about escaping. It was about buying time. The man knew exactly what he was doing, and Lena was getting farther away. Easton's unmarked car swerved violently onto the highway, his tires screeching against the pavement. The black SUV was ahead of him, weaving through traffic. Easton gritted his teeth and gunned the engine. You're not getting away. He grabbed his radio. Morales, I need backup, now. We're en route, Morales responded. Where's Lena? In that damn SUV. His blood boiled as the car ahead tried to lose him. Then, the passenger window rolled down. A gun flashed in the dark. Easton barely had time to react before bullets ripped through the air. Glass exploded as his windshield shattered. Shit. He yanked the wheel hard, barely avoiding a direct hit. His tires skidded, but he kept control. The SUV was getting away. Easton pressed the gas to the floor. Not today. He reached into the glove compartment, grabbing his own weapon. Then he did something insane. He rolled down his window, aimed one-handed, and fired. The bullet tore through the SUV's back tire. Bang! The car swerved wildly, struggling for control. Then it spun out, slammed into the guardrail, came to a dead stop. Easton was out of his car before it had fully stopped. Gun raised, he stormed forward. The driver was slumped over the wheel, unconscious. The passenger, the gunman, was crawling out, bleeding. Easton didn't give him a chance to recover. He grabbed the guy by the collar and slammed him against the car. Where is she? The man spit blood, sneering. You're too late. Easton pressed the barrel of his gun to his head. Wrong answer. The man laughed weakly. You think this ends here? Easton's finger twitched on the trigger. Where is she? The man coughed. She's already gone. Easton's chest tightened. He shoved the guy aside and ripped open the back door. Empty. His stomach dropped. Lena wasn't in the car. They had already moved her. Ava stormed into the precinct, dragging the captured suspect behind her. The officers inside stared as she threw the man into a chair. Sit, he smirked at her. Fiery. I like that. Ava leaned down, her face inches from his. I have a gun, she said coldly, and I have a reason to use it, so if you want to keep smiling, tell me where the girl is. The man tilted his head. Then, slowly, he said, You think this is about her? Ava froze. His smile widened. This is about you. Before Ava could react, her phone rang. She yanked it out. Easton? His voice was sharp, urgent. Ava, they tricked us. Lena's not in the SUV. Ava's heart stopped. They took her somewhere else, Easton continued. We need to find out where. Ava turned slowly back to the man sitting in front of her. The man who had surrendered so easily. The man who was too calm. This is about you. Ava's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about Lena. It was about all of them. And now they were playing right into Monroe's hands. The final move, Easton's pulse thundered in his ears as he gripped the steering wheel, weaving through traffic at breakneck speed. Lena was gone, and if Monroe had her, time was running out. Through the radio, Ava's voice was sharp. Easton, tell me you have something. I'm tracking the SUV, Easton growled. They ditched the decoy, but Morales found a lead. Morales came through on the line. We pulled GPS data from the SUV's last stop before you shot it down. It pinged near an abandoned airstrip outside the city. Easton's grip tightened. They're moving her. That's our best guess, Morales confirmed. If they get her airborne, we'll lose her. Easton pressed the gas harder. Not happening. The airstrip, midnight showdown. The airstrip loomed ahead, a desolate stretch of cracked pavement and rusting hangars. Floodlights glowed ominously in the night, illuminating a private jet waiting on the runway. Easton killed the engine? Slipping out of his car with his gun drawn. Ava was already there, hidden behind a stack of shipping crates, her hands clenched into fists. She's in there, she whispered, her eyes locked on the plane. Through the cockpit glass, Monroe sat in the pilot's seat, speaking into a headset, looking calm. Too calm. And at the base of the plane's stairs, Lena. Her small figure was rigid with fear, held tightly by a brutish man in a black suit. Easton's blood boiled. Ava whispered, "We have to move now." Easton nodded once, then they attacked. Bullets and betrayals. Gunfire erupted. Easton took down the first guard, dropping him before he could reach for his weapon. Ava dodged behind a crate, taking out another as she moved. Panic spread through Monroe's men, but they weren't amateurs. They fired back. The airstrip lit up with muzzle flashes. Monroe was already moving. Easton saw him rush toward the jet's cockpit, his plan clear. Take off, disappear, erase everything. Not today, Easton muttered, rushing forward. He fired at the plane's engine, hitting the fuel line. A small explosion rocked the jet, flames licking at the side. Monroe stumbled, cursing. Lena screamed. Ava was already there, lunging for the man holding her. With a swift, brutal move, she drove her elbow into his throat, grabbing Lena as he collapsed. "Got her!" Ava yelled. Easton stormed up the plane stairs, his gun aimed at Monroe. The senator froze, hands raised. "This is over," Easton snarled. Monroe's lips curled into a smirk. "You think so?" Then, a click. Easton's heart dropped. Monroe had detonated a failsafe. The jet erupted into flames. Easton leapt off the stairs, hitting the ground hard as fire engulfed the plane. Monroe vanished in the explosion. The shockwave knocked everyone back. For a moment, there was nothing but fire and smoke. Then, Easton scrambled up, coughing. Ava was kneeling beside Lena, shielding her. The girl was shaking, but alive. It was over. Almost. The aftermath. The next morning, Easton stood outside the hospital, watching as Lena clung tightly to Margaret, who had been discharged. Margaret's eyes shimmered with emotion. "You saved her." Easton shook his head. "She saved herself." Ava smiled softly. "She's strong." Margaret took a deep breath. "And Monroe?" Easton's expression darkened. "They never found a body." Ava crossed her arms. "So he's still out there?" "Maybe," Easton admitted. "But he won't be coming back anytime soon." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you, Detective." Easton gave a small nod. "Take care of her." As he turned to leave, Lena ran after him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thank you," she whispered. Easton's heart clenched. He crouched, ruffling her hair. "You be good, kiddo." She nodded fiercely. As Easton and Ava walked away, Morales met them in the parking lot. "You really think Monroe's gone?" she asked. Easton looked up at the rising sun, his jaw tightening. "No," he said, and deep down he knew. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning.